You're listening to Brain Lenses, a show about how we perceive the world, ourselves, and each other. I'm Colin Wright. The word truth is tricky to define, as it means somewhat different things in different realms of inquiry. In some contexts, something that is true is in alignment with reality or demonstrable fact, and is the opposite of something that is not congruous with reality. Thus, if I say the world is round, that's a truthful statement because the world is roughly spherical. If I say the world is flat like a pancake, that would be considered false because it doesn't line up with reality. According to some definitions of truth, if we live in a world in which all the data we've gathered seems to indicate the world is flat, despite the world actually being round, it is true that the world is round, even if we don't yet realize it. According to other definitions, it would be true the world is flat in that moment, because everything we seem to know says that's the case. So truth can change with time as our understanding of reality changes. You might also argue that truth is subjective and based on our personal experiences of reality. So you and I could witness the same car accident, and because we were standing in different places, because we've had different life experiences, and because I have bad eyesight and you don't, we may walk away with different understandings of what happened. There's a universal thing that actually happened in that context, with a sequence of events having actually occurred, which in turn ultimately led to a car accident. But according to this perspective, your truth will be different from my truth, and that's just to be expected. Interestingly, it seems to be possible to influence a person's impression of what's true by simply exposing them to whatever it is you want them to believe over and over again. This is often called the repetition-induced truth effect, or sometimes just the truth effect, or repetition-induced belief. And it's part of why companies with products to sell spend gobs of money to repeat the same slogans and catchphrases over and over again when we listen to the radio or watch TV. And it's part of why politicians are so keen to hit potential voters with the same message as many times as possible before voting day. There's some evidence that there's a point of diminishing returns with this approach, so a handful of exposures to a message will increase a person's belief in it, but more exposures beyond that point won't have any real effect. Alarmingly, there's also evidence people who know something that is true can be convinced to instead believe something that is not true, a false alternative to that true thing, through the use of this effect. There's relevance here for most mediums of communication, but this is perhaps especially notable for social networks and other always-on, free-to-use platforms, where distributing false information in large quantities is especially easy and friction-free, and consequently, putting a whole lot of nonsense into the world that some people will eventually come to believe is especially attainable. One theory as to why our brains seem to behave this way is called the Fluency Hypothesis. Basically, our brains have an easier time recalling something they've been exposed to over and over again, and as a consequence, are more likely to summon up that oft-repeated thing when it's needed, rather than a less repeated thing, even if the latter is demonstrably true and the former is not. This theory has some support, but is still being investigated, as is the repetition-induced truth effect, so we unfortunately do not yet know why we seem to be so susceptible to this kind of manipulation. Though even lacking a complete explanation, it doesn't hurt to note this susceptibility and counter it where feasible. You can find out more about Brain Lenses, including how to support this show, and in return receive an additional episode of the show each week at brainlenses.com. You can also support this and all of my projects at understandery.com. I'm Colin Wright, and I'll talk to you again next week.